Okay, thank you. So sorry about that. But I do think that it is a good thing to check out right now. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
thanks, Sinclair.
Yeah, she's awesome. Look at that.
Promoting it.
Definitely. But yeah, so I thought that it would be an interesting thing to check out a broad spectrum of work that can be inspired and kind of rooted in printmaking, but it can go really outside of printmaking too, to kind of give you an idea of where you go after this. You know, of course, you don't have to do what Michael is doing, but it's probably going to give you some ideas of how to tie printmaking ideas and sort of like a DNA of printmaking into your practice a little bit. Okay, so without further ado, go ahead.
All right, let's learn about some of that printmaking DNA. I like that. Yeah, you know, like Kiyomi's saying, I think the work that I make is like pretty varied and pretty diverse. And honestly, I'm going to skip over tons and tons of stuff. And I could also just focus on individual pieces for like a very long period of time, but I won't. There's like, I'm trying to show like maybe a 12-year time frame here, and I'm trying to show over 200 images, but there's so many more. So anyway, yeah, in general, I'm kind of like interested in, you know, in doing this presentation, like what are some of the links between the works? Whoops, how do I, okay. What are some of the links between the works, and how does it?
Wait, no, sorry, I was trying to stop it. Sorry.
How does it change over time? How is it still the same? So that's kind of what I was thinking about as I was going through this whole presentation. But yeah, just in general, like, you know, yeah, printmaking. When I started art school, I went to Heron School of Art and Design in Indianapolis, like Kiyomi said, and I was definitely like interested in being like an illustrator or maybe a painter. So for my first like year and a half or so, I was like, yeah, I want to be an illustrator, going in that direction. But I took this random printmaking class the summer after my first year. It was monotype. And I was just like, that was my first experience, just going gung-ho, like just making all kinds of crazy artwork, doing whatever I wanted. And it was like life-changing for me. And then I took another printmaking class in the fall, an etching class, and I loved that. That was awesome. And I definitely got to give credit to my professor, Meredith Setzer, who totally inspired like me to like, you know, be in the print lab and work away, and she's awesome. And then, yeah, like, you know, around that time, I was like, you know, I think I like printmaking more than this whole illustration thing. And from that point on, I became a printmaking major and, you know, graduated. And then I went to graduate school, actually right after graduating with my bachelor's degree. And yeah, I was in the printmaking program in graduate school, which is where I met Kiyomi. But I definitely like went off the rails in a way around that time. And I think the work became, you know, I think that it's very rooted in printmaking and conceptually comes from a printmaking sort of space. And I'm going to try to explain what I'm doing in that sort of way. I think my grad school committee, they were a bit skeptical and probably still are. And I think most printmakers would be pretty skeptical of like, you know, what I'm going to show you in that sort of way. But, you know, in my mind, I think like printmaking is such a big idea, and like printmakers have a way of like making it very like small and focused on a certain way of working. But in my mind, I see it as a very broad, expansive sort of thing. And for me, making art, it's all about like that transformation. It's all about stimulating your mind and growing as a person and engaging the art form and using that as like a springboard or a stepping stone into new thoughts, new experiences, and new perceptions of the world. So that is absolutely what art means to me. And that is, you know, the number one thing I'm trying to convey in the work itself is like, how can art like change the world? You know, what are the ways that it functions? Like, what is art? How do we conceptualize it? What value does art have? How does it affect the world around us? How does the world around us affect us? So that notion of like, you know, you're leaving an impression on the world and the world is leaving an impression on you. I'm definitely interested in a lot of those kinds of ideas. So you'll probably hear me talking about some of that stuff as we go through it. But this is actually the very first artwork I sold. which like I sold it during like my first solo show. And I just thought, oh, this is like a fun way to begin because this is actually a monotype. And the print itself, I think I threw away a long time ago. But this was just like a tiny little offcut of a print. And I thought, oh, this offcut is like really nice. And I built a frame for it. And basically this is like a tiny, very thin print in a frame, if that makes sense. So thinking about like what is an image, right? So this is like a work where like the image area is actually very small and the proportion is like kind of strange. So this was like maybe the first piece where I got started on thinking of artwork and this relation between images and objects. So I think like at this point in like my art making, I was thinking about like, a print is like a 2D image, right? But it's actually an impression on a piece of paper and ink on a paper, right? So it is also an object. So moving along. Oops. So moving along, this is like, another work from a little bit after that where there actually is a print here. This is a lithograph, but then there's also paint on top of the lithograph. So, I was making a ton of artwork. Like there's really quite a lot I'm not showing you from this time, but, kind of like using some of the prints that I wasn't super happy with and then just painting on them and reworking them. And it's just like, the art is done when you say it's done, right? So I would make a bunch of prints and then I would do all kinds of different approaches and experiments with them. So very much interested in experimenting and seeing where that would take me. This is a painting where it's basically, a very thin bit of spray paint sprayed here to kind of make a line. But, in doing so, there's more that happens. I was doing just like a lot of experiments at that time, of course, making tons of other work too. This is another painting. Here's another painting.
This is in a way, you can minimize it if you
Sure.
want. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like carborundum grit, there is paint. So this is maybe more of a mixed media piece. This is an actual print. This is a lithograph, like stone lithography, and there's probably like 5 or 6 layers on this. It's like a reductive process, but kind of making something very abstract through like this printmaking process. Definitely like, experimenting with it. Here's like another, I think this is just a painting. I'm not sure, there might have been a print under here at this time, but it's like a painting with drawing on top of it too. I was making a lot of these works and I was selling a lot of these works too. I would just set up a table and I would sell artwork for like $5 or $10 like a print. And like, that's like, some might say that's like totally devaluing like the art, but at the same time, it's like, I still have random people tell me like, oh, I have your painting hung up in my like kitchen and it means so much to me. And it's like, wow, like I totally forgot about that. But, for me, I was just making so much, just making. And like, I think when you're making that much, you have to sell it and get rid of it or give it away or whatever. So I feel like art was kind of becoming a currency for me at this point in time because I was selling it, and definitely it was like, it's not like I was making a lot of money by selling a painting for like $5, but it was actually putting food on the table at a time when I was a very poor student. This was like a larger 3 foot by 4 foot or maybe 3 foot by 5 foot drawing that I did for like a group exhibition around that time. So working very abstractly, but kind of interested in the idea of like, could an abstract work render like an impression or an emotion or a feeling, so very much interested in this idea of like something that's abstract, but still has like a resemblance of real life. This was a monotype. It was kind of like an offset monotype onto these boards. And then this is kind of like a wall installation from that. And it's kind of hard to see from the documentation image, but there's like a horizon line that kind of unites all of these works. So they're kind of off kilter in a way, but there is like an image that's kind of found within these works. This is an entire can of white spray paint on a piece of black paper. So I was also definitely interested in conceptual art and like, art being a product of a certain action or a certain mindset. So like, I think like Sol LeWitt is like a conceptual artist that I think was like fueling like a lot of this kind of work or these ideas. Similarly, this is a 2B pencil scribbled entirely onto a wall, like the entire pencil drawn onto the wall. This work, actually, this is the second rendition that I did, and somebody vandalized the first version because it like made them mad, apparently. And I repainted the wall and drew a second pencil onto the wall, which that was the first time my artwork got written about in like a publication. So that was like a little sad to have my artwork vandalized, but also kind of cool to get to redo it again. This was actually in the same show. It was a student show at the time, like a juried exhibition. And this was a offset monotype onto drywall. And then I smashed up all the drywall, and it was kind of this installation.
What was the title?
The title is The Sky is Falling, but I guess it always has been. So this is kind of like, it's as if the sky was made out of drywall and it fell down onto the ground, right? So kind of like starting to veer into sculpture, or how printed works can become sculpture. And then, this is basically just transporting the work. I just thought this was a fun shot. And, it's like artwork, there's so many stages and states to the work. I was definitely interested in this idea of like, what does art do when it's not on display? So I feel like I have a ton of like interesting documentation image that's just all about like the art in process or in transit or in storage. I think that's like a very fun idea of like, when does the art begin and when does the art end? Like, is there a temporal nature or a physical boundaries to what and where the artwork is? And then like, the inverse of that is just like making art in whatever the circumstances are at hand. And like, this is just like, a sheet or like probably an advertisement from a magazine or maybe something from a book. I can't remember what, but just tearing out the page and then like painting on it to kind of create imagery or art, or essentially create tension from, some other image or source. And that became like a way that I would, make imagery or think about art. Here's like a collage, very similar, where, taking a couple images out of two different books and kind of combining them together. So, thinking about, conceptually what happens with images when you juxtapose them. More of that where it's collaged, and there's also drawing and painting involved. And this is, oh yeah, I guess I think I'm still an undergraduate student at this time. More of that, this is just like collage work. I don't think I ever showed any of this, but it felt important to me at the time that I was making it. Another collage. So yeah, it's not like I'm printing anything here, but these are printed materials. And I feel like that is a really important aspect of like what the work actually is. This is a MS Paint drawing. I don't know if you're familiar with MS Paint, but it's like the very archaic drawing tool on like an old PC computer. I'm sure there's like similar things on today's computers, but basically just scribbling. I scribbled for several hours to create this giant MS Paint drawing. The print itself is like, I want to say like 20 by 30. And it's a photolithograph. And it's printed with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 layers. So a lot of layers, photolithography. So that's just kind of taking like a digital image creation process and transferring it into like a physical work. Here's just like a random drawing on just some found paper. I want to say this is like for bowling or something like that. I'm not sure, but just like the world around me being like an inspiration to like work or aesthetics or formal creations and conceptual creations.
I have a question.
Yes.
How did you decide which blocks to scribble in that last one?
This one?
Yeah, no, forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good question. I think I was trying to follow some sort of sequence, and a lot of this kind of image making for me is all about like decision making and how that results in like the rest of the image. So I remember scribbling in these blocks and then doing like the next step down, but then kind of just experimenting through it. So I know there's some sort of sequence or order, but kind of trying to play around with that and trying to think about conscious decision making versus unconscious decision making, if that makes any sense.
Cool.
It might not. I'm not sure.
Well, you were thinking sequence, but it's not
Yeah.
like there was specific thing that you were following in the beginning.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely interested in that idea of like things drawn or created consciously versus unconsciously, and what's the relationship there, what's the difference there. So I think this was kind of an experiment in that approach or way of working. Same with this, which I mean, another artist I feel like this relates to is like Ellsworth Kelly, if you are familiar with his work. Same with the last image, where this is just a digital piece where it's like I can't even remember what the image was, and now it's so scrambled that it's its own unique thing. Here is a screen print with letterpress on it. So, kind of interested in sort of like poetic ideas as well. Something that means something. Here is a painting, or is it a sculpture? I'm not sure, but it's a little square, maybe I think 12 by 12. And you can see there's a little bit of paint on it. So some painting was involved, but I'm not quite sure if it's a painting or not. And I was also making these works and putting them in frames. So I was also a custom framer for a while, and then also learned to build my own frames. So framing became an important way of conceptualizing artwork. But just installing framed work in public outdoors. So this was in a parking structure under a freeway. This was, I'm not sure where this one is, to be honest. It's gone now. This one was underneath like a bridge by like a river. So basically I was installing these works to kind of create these spaces that were really just to kind of create a very strange, unusual experience for whoever would encounter them in real life. So thinking about like, does art have to happen in the gallery? Can art happen in real life? Anyway, here's some more works on paper where, the next few that I'm going to show you, they're monotypes underneath, but then there's spray paint and graphite on top of them. So kind of mixed media works, and thinking kind of about architectural spaces, I think, like windows and doorways. And like another kind of similar one, like, I think there is some sort of reference to like windows here or reflections where, these are abstract works, but I feel like they have some grounding in reality. I was kind of like interested in sort of playing with that. And then these are mesotints. So this is a type of etching, like an etching process, like a tonal based etching process. And I did this series of 7 etchings, which were all based off of this one window. And it was kind of about the different perspectives one could yield by looking through a window in different ways. I think it's also about like the print on paper as well, given like the shape of the plate and its location on the paper itself. The series was called We All Have Our Limits. So for me, it was about like the different perspectives you can get by like looking through like a singular portal, like a window, and just kind of thinking about that, like kind of a meditation on that. Thinking about all the different views you could have out of the same window. I keep seeing the same tree out there. And then I did this show, We Don't Have to Think Like This, or We Don't Have to Think Like That Anymore. And basically I set up a wall out in the middle of a field, and I had this art show just kind of in the middle of nowhere, essentially. It was right by the road, actually, so there were cars driving by, and if you were driving by in your car, you probably saw like this wall out there, and basically it's kind of like these drawings of these horizon lines, and they kind of sync up with the horizon in the background. And yeah, like eventually like snow came and it fell on the gallery wall, and eventually the wall fell over. And a couple of my friends, I think, actually like took some works from it.
They were trying to save it, maybe.
Yeah, so that's cool. I feel a little bad because I just left it there, and that was not the right thing to do. So sorry, whoever's field that was. This is some more letterpress work, where basically it's an etching with aqua tint to kind of make this black square or black rectangle, and then like text accompanying it. I did this whole portfolio of prints with different text relating to it. So thinking about the different meanings that a view of a black rectangle might actually entail. So image text relationship.
Oh.
What's that?
I was just reading.
Yeah, so yeah, beneath your eyelids, night driving, nothing for miles, a black rectangle, background is the new foreground. I don't know what it looks like, but I know what it feels like. 2 3/4 by 4 3/4 segment of a t-shirt. Prisoner's Cinema, Marco Polo. This may or may not be a window. Here's like another typography-based piece, letterpress with relief printing, and it says, "This is a holy place." It looks like something that was torn out of a book, maybe. And this was another print where I would just put it up in like these like outdoor locations that I thought seemed sort of special to me for some reason. So like just whatever I was reacting to or wherever I was reacting to, I would kind of put these up. And strangely, I don't know how, but I think Kiyomi saw this piece like before we even met. So I must have sold one of these to somebody, and it must have been in some.
No, it was at a print exchange.
Yeah.
I sold it in a mix.
And this is
Definitely
like,
remember this.
we were in different parts of the country at the time.
Mhm.
So I don't know why, I don't know how she saw it, but you know, it's a small world out there, right? Yeah, another abstract piece. This is a monotype, like kind of an experiment with like a Xerox transfer with the silver ink. And I think there were like 80 or 90 layers to this monotype. Like it was so heavy with the ink that it, like so many layers on it that, yeah, it felt like heavy. Like this is like the heaviest print I've ever printed because there's so much ink on there.
It's more ink than paper.
Yeah, I mean, this is like practically painting, I think, or maybe you could say it is painting.
More than painting.
I'm not sure, but definitely blurring that line. This is a lithograph, so I think there's like 9 or 10 layers to this lithograph. It started as kind of like a touche wash. This is a mesotint, like there's etching and then mesotint on top of it, which mesotint is kind of like a pretty special intaglio process. I could blab on and on about it, but it is something that I researched a lot when I was an undergrad. But kind of like this sort of landscape, moody landscape kind of thing that was going on there. This is another typography experiment, and it says objects in a field of objects, to where you can't even read it anymore. This is another print. It's titled Roy G. Biv, and basically it's the colors of the rainbow all printed on top of each other. And then it makes like, basically layering all those colors makes like a black color. So it's kind of like playing around with that conceptual idea of what is a rainbow. And then kind of moving into like more of that idea. I think this is, one of those instances where it's like, it almost kind of becomes an object, and like the documentation, you can't really see it, but in real life, there's like the strange iridescence to the print itself. And then, I started making some triangular works, which I think triangles were pretty trendy at the time. Still maybe they aren't so much now. But, I definitely was interested in this idea of a triangle just because it was a way of making like an image while addressing the object nature of it. because like, yeah, a triangle does not fit within a rectangular format, which is what we typically think of two-dimensional work as being. It's almost a prerequisite for a two-dimensional work to be a rectangle. So these are some etching plates. This is magnesium, I believe, and I etched those with nitric acid. And this was one of the test prints that I made, you know, just trying to put as much color into a print as I could, and it had like this really interesting overlapping of the lines. Definitely one that has some really cool up close details to it. This is the same print, but with different colors. So like a dark green and a black. This is like a larger etching plate, and kind of rolling it up as a relief print. So there's like some etched lines in there. I was kind of interested in this idea of like a triangle being kind of off kilter, you know, kind of making it even more of an object, or, you know, moving even further away from that, you know, presumed rectangular nature of a work. And here's like a frame, like a painting in a frame, which even the plexiglass has sort of this painted texture on it. And it's supposed to kind of look like you're looking out the window and it's a rainy day or rainy night. So it looks like there's some sort of water or something running down the window. Here's another painting. It's like a painting on canvas. And it's like, yeah, like, you know, a painting like this, what aspect of it is actually the painting? Is it the triangle, or is it the small painted rectangle along the side? Similarly, you know, here's like a triangular painting, but there's actually two triangles within the triangular painting. And to top it off, like the painting itself, it is actually a painting, but I spray painted the painting to accentuate the details, and it made it look like a fake painting. So it looked like a fake painting, but it actually is a real painting. But it looks like a print of a painting, if that makes sense. And I was definitely doing a lot of like masked work, like masking out areas and painting them. So hard edge painting was definitely like an interest, like optical artwork was a influence as well. Here's like a 4 foot by 8 foot painting that I did like for a client. And it's kind of like a singular image behind all these different sort of shapes. So like, you know, coming up with a composition that has kind of like an underlying image underneath it, and that conflict or tension between like these shapes and the image found within. And yeah, I was also like, you know, like I was saying before, challenging the idea of like a rectangular artwork. Like, is this a two-dimensional artwork, or is it an object of some kind? So you know, these are sort of mixed media pieces with some printmaking involved, like starts with a monotype and then like some drawing and painting on top. Same with this, where it's like, yeah, like obviously this isn't like your regular rectangular artwork. So I think I see some rectangles in there. This was my favorite from that series, where it's like a trapezoid sort of shape. This one was titled Art on Mars. Like, what does art on Mars look like? That was the question in my head while I made it. And yeah, like this was some of the work that was like in my BFA graduation show, plus some of the other pieces you saw. And kind of like right after graduating or while graduating, you know, I was also, you know, interested in, you know, typography and like, you know, the more poetic aspects of, you know, what could text within an artistic context produce. This was like a glow stick that I illuminated and put in a frame for an exhibition, and it was only glowing on the opening reception, and then it was just a used up glow stick in a frame. This was broken mirrors into a sort of cube-ish shape. After graduating, like the summer after graduating, I did this other show that had a bunch of very strange artwork in it that, you know, some might barely consider as artwork, and the whole installation itself was kind of a work. Sadly, I don't have photos of it to include at this time. Yeah, here's like a magazine print, which I think painting xylene on it to abstract it. So essentially messing up the print to create an artwork. And yeah, I was definitely like experimenting a lot at this time, just like really just, quantity wise, just making tons and tons of art, or, even just experimenting. So it's like, this is a Xerox print, just creating abstract art with the Xerox machine, or using that as a way to generate imagery, playing around with seriality and multiplicity. So this is like another Xerox machine work. Here's another Xerox machine. It's like, I don't even remember what I was copying. It might have been nothing. I don't think in this work I was copying anything. I think this is just the light coming in and affecting the copy making. And then I moved to California, and this is like the view of the pool in my apartment complex at the time. And that was also when I got like, around that time is when I got like my first smartphone. And this is like a smartphone image. And I was taking tons of photos and videos. Oops. And that was really inspiring to me, because I think, our camera phones or cell phones are, they really changed the way that we engage the world around us. And I was hyper aware of that in the moment. Like this notion of like taking photos or videos, like really alters the way that we see the world around us. And I felt like there was something really interesting and poetic to that. So I was thinking before that a lot about this image object relationship, but then I think digital aspects like, digital photography kind of fitting into that, and like then thinking about like, snapshot photography and how that in some way relates to like some of the work and ideas that I was playing around with before. So kind of using snapshot photography as like a jumping off point for even more ideation. And other like works that are like the opposite of that. So this is like just a drawing on a foggy bathroom mirror. I think this was when I was staying in a hotel looking for apartments when I was moving out here, and thinking about like, very temporal work that like maybe only exists for a few minutes, or, could easily be erased, or like work that is never meant to be viewed by others. So I definitely was interested in this idea of like secret art, or like art that, doesn't have a conventional mode of presentation, or maybe art that is not at all made for presentation, So I was definitely like thinking about a lot of different ideas with art and what it could be. And then of course I was still making prints, still, creating ideas through, typical printmaking processes. Like this is stone lithography. And this print is called Practice Makes Perfect. And basically I was trying to draw the Canadian maple leaf from memory, and just attempting it like, a couple dozen times. I'm not sure if I got any better by the end of it either. But thinking about like, like that, national icon, and sort of what it means. And I'm half Canadian, and I grew up in Canada for like my formative years. So I think I was also kind of thinking about like my own hybrid identity in that sort of way. Like, am I Canadian or am I American? So thinking about like those symbols and how they in some ways define us, and in other ways do not define us. So these are stars from the American flag, for instance, and that became like a jumping off point for a lot of different ideas. And I began making Xerox prints of the stars and then coloring them in with Sharpie markers to kind of create my own constellations of sorts. And I don't have an image of it here, but these were all like sort of put up on the wall in a grid, and kind of like these sort of accidental constellations would form out of this process. I also made prints, following the same idea. So this is like on a lithostone, actually. It's before printing, but about to be printed. And like, here's the print, and then I would color in all the stars of the print to kind of create a message. That says rollerblades. This one says real love. There were a few more that I made that were kind of all about, these sort of wishes that one might wish upon the stars, right? And these are more stars. And this actually kind of goes into the next print, which was another star print. And you kind of see the gradation, right? How the color changes from layer to layer, or from like top to bottom. And this print is one of those ones where I've actually seen, I think it might be like a Target backpack that was on sale at the time that looked like pretty much exactly like this. But this is a print that is actually pretty complex. If you look at it, no star color is the same on here. They're all different colors using different gradients, and I think about 11 or 12 layers. So this is actually one of those prints where it's actually very complicated, but you really wouldn't know unless you knew what to look for. But it looked a lot like this pop commercial kind of artwork that was, you know, being sold at the time. And there's a lot of other artwork I've made that I'm not even sharing that, like, it looks like something you might buy at like Target. I don't know if that's like a good thing or a bad thing, or.
I have a question then.
Yes.
Was sort of like the kitsch idea of kitsch, was that in your interest, concern?
I'm definitely interested in the ideas of kitsch, or like, you know, if an artwork can be so boring and banal that it becomes, what was the word? What was your assignment?
Extraordinary moment.
This is my extraordinary moment where it's so boring, but at the same time, if you kind of know what's going on, it's actually like
12 layers.
it's a pretty phenomenal thing. You know, similar star imagery where like I don't remember how many. I remember I counted how many stars these were, but I've already forgotten. But how many stars I could fit onto a single piece of paper. This was another collage where I went through all these National Geographics that I had, and I cut out every single ocean image, and then, you know, randomly mixed them up and collaged them together. I did a similar thing here where this is like I'm about to pour resin on top of another one of these collages where it's actually these Christmas cards and these books of galaxies and stars that I did kind of like a photo lithographic process to print it, like a CMYK process. This is actually with smart plates or pronto plates, which is like a very cheap, affordable version of lithography. So this was kind of an experiment of like, how much detail could you get? And like the misregistrations that would sometimes happen, I thought were really interesting components to it, but kind of making an abstract work out of that. And there's also this glow-in-the-dark screen printed layer on here too. So this was like a glow-in-the-dark print that would be like activated by putting it in the dark. And then like, here's some other works where I would just go through old magazines and I would find aspects of images that I thought were interesting, and I would cut them out and then I would light them and photograph them. So these are some husky dogs, sled dogs. Here's a lady feeding some stray cats. This actually became a print and a t-shirt that I did. So this was, you know, like not much more than an exercise in this current state, but it, you know, it became a source of imagery for other things I was making. And yeah, I mean, for me, I think like a lot of this stuff it's connected in some way or another. Like, you know, a lot of these ideas might seem very random and whatnot, but I feel like they have connections to other works, or there's some underlying connections there. Here is a cat. You know how you take if you have your flash on and you take a photo of a cat, you see their crazy cat eyes. Here's an inverted image of a cat. And I made this actually this really cool box that's a container for Christmas lights, and there's like a mirror at the bottom of the box. So it's kind of like actually a furniture piece. It's kind of like an end table at our house right now. But I took all these photos of the Christmas lights in the box, and then I kind of created this arrangement of the actual photos. So it's like at the same time, while I'm thinking a lot about like the digital imagery, like thinking about cat photos and what those mean for society and how important they are to us, thinking about like this other, you know, printed photos were really going away at this time. This is like 20, 2011. And yeah, I remember at this time it became harder and harder to make this work because like, you know, Walgreens and stuff, they stopped like doing processing film. So these are like, I would take photos with those disposable cameras and then I would take them in and have them develop the images. So that's kind of what this is, and creating like installations out of the printout photos that they made. This is like another, like a nature drawing book or whatever, and I drew the elk on top of the elk that's in the print. And then there's the plants. So I got all these containers from IKEA, and I went around and I just like dug all these weeds out of the ground and I put them in these little containers. And this was like a critique where I brought all these plants and we talked about them. But that actually became this other piece, or this other installation I made called Blurry Photos of Plants. And it's kind of like this centerpiece in this sort of squarish looking gallery. And there's like, I would run around and take photos of plants, and I made sure that I was not like taking a good photo. I made sure they were blurry, right? As the show is titled. And I took like hundreds and hundreds of photos of plants, just like walking around, jogging around, skateboarding, taking photos, all these photos of plants and printing them off at like Walgreens or wherever, and then creating this kind of like installation out of those photos, tiling them together. And then in the middle, there's kind of like this glass that's been painted on, and all those weeds or plants are kind of growing in there. And there's also like some coffee cups and like a toaster. I still have this toaster, it's great. And basically you could make tea and toast. There was a sign outside that said free tea and toast. So you could come in and make yourself some food and drink.
The title of the show was Blurry Photos of
Yeah,
Plants.
the show was called Blurry Photos of Plants. And I wish I could go back in time because I bet I could identify every single one of these plants. This is lamb's quarters. It's actually edible. You could have put it on your toast and eaten it. I actually don't know the name of this kind of grass, but
Maybe crabgrass.
that's not crabgrass.
Okay.
I want to say it's a ryegrass of some sort, but, and yeah, here's some of the photos. As you can see, they're like abstractions in their own right. And the photos themselves could be completely interchangeable, and it kind of became about the tiling or the design. And of course, all this whole time I'm still making prints. So this is a lithography print, or like basically would become a litho print. And it's kind of like an image of, I intended it to be a wolf, but people interpreted it as a cat. And I say, sure, it looks like a cat to me as well. And this kind of relates to like, I made all these coloring book pages of the same sort of image. The pages said, you've got 3 wishes, brah. And then you could color it in however you wanted. The lithograph print, which I forgot to include in this presentation, it was open for interpretation. I made some different versions where it said different things. One of my friends made this one. This was my favorite. But there were like quite a lot of different ones that were made, which this was like, I made a lot of video art at that time too. So I'm taking a lot of photos and videos with my cell phone. And this is kind of like this installation of sorts where it's like a video piece playing on that computer. And then the sound is very loud, being blasted out through this boom box. And this is that Christmas box I was telling you about where all those photos came through. And then there was even a person that was sitting as part of the installation. So this is actually my former roommate and our good friend. And he was like a part of the artwork. So like a living component. So you could think of him like you might think of these Christmas lights or the boombox or something. And that kind of then was incorporated into the show, which this show was kind of all about like the coloring book pages and things like that. And just like this very abstract and distorted view of nature. Which in my mind is like people are part of nature, right? So it makes sense to include them in whatever it is.
I have
And
a question.
yes,
Was he there the whole time during the duration of exhibition?
almost the whole time, not every day,
Wow.
not the whole time, because he had classes to go to
Yeah.
and stuff. But you can see like the lithograph that I made back there. There's all these coloring book pages here. There's like a movie screening in ultra slow motion that there's actually like a reflection of it. And there is like a pineapple cutting in there. And I don't know, it's like information overload in some ways. There's like a fake flowers up there. You know, there's a lot of different stuff going on. And actually, this is when Kiyomi and I first met.
Yeah.
Is she was visiting CSULB and she just so happened to stumble into my gallery space. And I remember talking with her. Obviously, we didn't know each other yet, but like we met at the CSULB galleries. I gave her one of my blurry photos of plants. You must have colored a coloring book page, right?
Yeah, I don't think Dusty was there
Yeah.
at that time. Yeah.
So that was cool.
Mm.
That was when we met. This was a work from that show where this is a, I don't know, like a little wolf thing. And it's got this weird like Native American aesthetic aspect to it, like very kitschy. And it's actually broken. And the back of it, there's this big hole in the back, and I glued it all back together. And I made this like little, what would you call this? Like container or presentation vessel for it, which is like broken mirrors.
Like a diorama, maybe?
Sure, diorama. So this is where the little broken object, tchotchke, sort of lives in my mind. And that's just like found object. But, you know, in my mind, I'm kind of thinking of this as a print because it's like a mass-produced object, right?
Mhm,
So in my mind, this is kind of like, this is a print and it needs to be displayed. Other, you know, similar but very different ideas, you know, there's one of those little party balls. I got one of these at a like Goodwill or something. And this is like, you know, on MacBooks, they would have like the photo taker thing and you could, I don't know, this is like just a screenshot. Photo booth.
Yeah.
I did this other project for a few years and I need to bring it back. Stare at the Moon at 8:12 on January 26th and No, You Are Not Alone. And that is the wolf moon. And for a few years, I did this project where I would try to convince people to look at the moon on the full moon, the wolf moon at 8:12. And if you did that, then there'd at least be one other person watching the moon with you. So this notion of togetherness of some sort, or almost like a show that is not related to a gallery, or thinking about art as a point of connection, right? This was another show I did in the galleries here at CSULB. And, you know, honestly, I had a ton of like digital images that kind of ended up in the show and just like all over the place. And the show was pitch black and you had to go in there with a flashlight and a CD player. And there were CDs sprinkled all over the floor. And you could pick up CDs and put them in your CD player and listen to what was on there. A lot of it was ocean sounds, but there was a lot of like albums from musicians and bands and whatnot. Just this crazy variety of sounds and music. And then like with the flashlight, the CDs would also cast this sort of rainbow on the walls as they would reflect through it. And there were mirrors everywhere and there was artwork and you're kind of exploring through it. The show was titled Shadow World. So kind of like the light and the shadow became like how artwork was engaged or illuminated. Here was that Christmas box. And, you know, there's like a lot of reoccurring artworks in a lot of my projects where it's like, it's the same work might be reused multiple times in different capacities or contexts. That's Michel Jagdio, if you can tell. So this was like, this box was there kind of like, you know, casting this glow in the space. This was another show I did about halfway through my time at CSULB, and it was kind of like an installation, but it was also a video piece, and it was also an audio piece too. So kind of like making a work that is hovering on these different aspects of what the art was. So the piece was called The Animals, and it was a bunch of YouTube videos, and I would record the YouTube videos through my phone. And then I would edit them into this long, like, it was a 20-minute long video, which featured some of the best animal videos you could find on YouTube. So made a recording of all the videos, and I created a soundtrack for the recording. So, you know, I'm a musical person as well. I've been in several bands and played a lot of shows and things. So I made like a whole 20-minute soundtrack just to go along with the video, and it's synced up. So like, you know, the sound would relate to like what you were watching. And then the video, in addition to being screened on this laptop, was also projected into the space onto all the walls. This was actually not on YouTube. This was my roommate's cat named Louie. This was the one part of the video that wasn't a YouTube video. And it was about 3 minutes of like watching this cat breathe.
Oh, sorry.
This is like a polar bear from the YouTube video, like being projected on a blanket, but it also would go all over the walls. So this is almost like the video becomes so softened and abstract in some projections of it. And I should, of course, mention that it was being projected through an aquarium. So the aquarium glass was actually refracting the light into the space and creating these abstract visuals. So it was kind of like an audio-visual piece. And there actually was a screen printed artist statement. So there was like a little bit of printmaking in there. But I was thinking a lot about goldfish. You know how goldfish, there's like different kinds of goldfish. Like there's the regular kind, there's the kinds with the big fat bellies, there's the kinds with the big eyeballs. And just thinking about like, oh, there's like different aesthetics within the same species of fish, right? And thinking about how those aesthetics have been sort of bred out over hundreds of years, perhaps thousands of years. So that I knew there was something interesting about fish at that point. And this was the first aquarium that I got. And this is called Hornwort. This is one of my favorite aquatic plants for aquariums. It's great. One of the easiest aquarium plants to take care of. And, you know, that eventually led into my MFA thesis show, which it was called Aquariums. And it was all about aquariums. Well, really all about fish keeping, like the hobby of fish keeping. And specifically, I was interested in this overlap between, you know, like, could a hobby be an art form? Is a hobby an art form? And if so, what does that mean? Like, what can we pull out of that overlapping or that relationship? Because there's so many interesting, you know, formal and conceptual links between fish keeping and art making. And I wanted to do a show that was all about how related they were. So thinking about aquariums as aesthetic objects, but also thinking about the concept of fish keeping, thinking about the history of fish keeping, and thinking about markets related to fish keeping. So a lot of this project was like about getting on Craigslist and going and finding these aquariums and like meeting these hobbyist fish keepers and getting these like aquariums from them and attending like these hobbyist events and watching a lot of YouTube videos and reading books about it and like all these different things, just learning about as much as I could about fish keeping and trying to, you know, see what happens when all of that trickles down into a final artwork, right? So I had 9 aquariums in this gallery, and there was a video projection. There was 2 overlapping soundtracks, and I screen printed all of this text about like the different aquariums, like onto felt that was on the wall. So it's almost like a little homemade like museum show about fish keeping and different aspects related to it. So every one of these aquariums has like a different meaning or concept related to it. Like this closest aquarium that this guy is looking at, it was a beta sorority. So it had female betas. So you might be aware of male betas, the fish with the very flowy fins. Honestly, I think those fish are boring. And I think the female betas are really interesting and really cool because, you know, male betas, you can never have more than one because they fight each other. Yeah, like most people are aware of that. But the female betas, you can have more than one, but it has to be like at least 5. Because if you have too few, then there becomes a pecking order and the weakest one gets picked on until it dies, basically. And so you have to have like a certain number of betas and kind of keep this communal tank that has this certain aggressive nature to it. So, you know, that was just this one style of aquarium that I was keeping, and there was like a text piece related to that. These were relief prints, so a woodcut, but sort of printed as a monoprint, like hand printing it with different ways. And basically it's a big goldfish pooping. This goldfish's name is Artemis. I missed that fish. Unfortunately, Artemis is now dead. Really sad because this fish was awesome. And yeah, there's also 2 male betas over here, and they would sometimes do battle with each other, not in a serious way. There's also gallons of poo water. So thinking about the waste stream was really important to me. And like I would have all this poo water around and I would water plants with it. And that was actually kind of what got me into gardening, is like figuring out what to do with all this wastewater. Because it's like if you're keeping an aquarium, you essentially have to get rid of all this wastewater. And it turns out you can grow plants with that wastewater and they love it. So here's another part of the show. These are marimo balls. They're algae balls. And they're spherical algae balls that form in certain northern hemisphere lakes, which in a way I almost feel like algae is almost like printmaking, right? Because it's multiplying itself as it photosynthesizes. Like it's kind of printmaking on a cellular level, if you get me. I'm really stretching these printmaking concepts here.
No, it's true.
Or in a way, like couldn't this shadow on the wall be a sort of a print of what is actually happening on the aquarium itself, right? This was my favorite, where it's basically like I painted the aquarium and then I scraped away these sort of paths, and there's a beta inside. And I was talking a lot of trash about male betas, but this guy was great. And he would go up and down these paths, and he would, if you went to this aquarium, he would swim up and he would follow you along the path. So you could tell he was looking out at you. And it felt almost like a game of some sort, where this fish would come up and it would swim along these channels, like looking out at you. So it really heightened the notion of like, when you look at fish, they are also looking back at you. It is a two-way street. Then this is like an aquaponics system, which is something that I really got into to a greater degree further along. And this system actually was in our bedroom for like, it ran for over 6 years. And yeah, it was great. But this was like when it first got set up for that show. I put air purifying houseplants in there. So there's like peace lilies here. There's a bunch of pothos and things you can't see, but it grew for years in our room, and like just basically would water would be pumped up from the tank into the grow bed, and then it would fill up and flush back down into the tank. So essentially the plants are cleaning the wastewater. So it's kind of a recirculating system. And that was part of the process of part of the show that I thought was really important, is all the different ways you could take care of a fish. So like this is like a quarantine hospital tank. You should never put fish back into like directly into a tank after you buy them. It's a good idea to like quarantine them for like a couple of weeks, because a lot of fish have like parasites when you buy them from the store. This was like a video I made of like setting up an aquarium, and it's almost like a crappy YouTube video, but I was plugged it into like this guitar amplifier, and it was really loud, and you'd hear all this water splashing and all this gravel like going all over the place, and it was this very loud sound component to the show. And I also made a soundtrack out of just like a bunch of music that I liked, that I thought coincided with the show. So there were kind of these two competing soundtracks. And then I was also a part of this show, and I sat in this chair and I watched the goldfish poop, and I would clean their poop out as they pooped throughout the whole show, because there's no filtration in this tank. So this was an example of fish keeping where you literally having to remove the waste as it's being produced, since there's no filtration of their waste. So like almost in a way, like fish keeping becomes a metaphor for like the environments that we live in, the world that we live in. I think there's so many transferable ideas within the show, and like people would come see it and they would go off in so many different directions about the meaning of the work, which I love. Like I love meaning being interpreted. And then some of this work went on, and this was at Palo Verde Art Center. And this was just the marimo balls. So a show all about the marimo balls. It had like some fish in it, which they were living with the balls. And yeah, at that show, I actually like brought a bunch of Marimo balls and I was giving them away during the reception. It was a thing. And my friend like made these glass fish bowls or whatever that the balls could live in, which, yeah, like you should never keep a fish in a fish bowl. It is inhumane for the fish, but you could totally keep a Marimo ball in a fish bowl and that would be absolutely lovely. So this was kind of that installation, and almost like, you know, I was thinking of it almost as like a strange abandoned temple or something like that. I'm not really sure, but something. And then another project from around that time. So I had just I was about to graduate with my master's degree, and this was like, I started this project, you know, maybe going into my last year of grad school, and I kind of like had an injury, and you know, I would take time and walk around as a way of recovering from that. And I would go down to the beach because I lived a few blocks away, and I would go, and every night these cats would come out, and I would go spend time with the cats and get as close as I could before they would run away. So I tried to develop these relationships with these beach cats, and that turned into a whole project, which was all about like basically just taking videos of these cats with my phone. And that turned into this project where I made this 45-minute documentary on my phone, all edited within my phone. And then I hooked it up to this speaker system that was like playing the actual sound from the phone at a very loud volume, and then also distorting it through effects pedals to kind of create this very like abstracted kind of sound of the beach as I was like watching the cats. And this sound was like at least as loud as real life. So there was like this was during an event called Sound Walk, which used to happen in Long Beach, which was all about sound related artwork. And this was kind of in a public setting. So I was just playing really loud ambient sound from the beach. And if you look at like what the video is, it's like these little videos of cats. And there was like an artist statement that basically like a long poem about it. So there was a written component too.
The Sound Walk is now moved to San Pedro.
Yeah, there's this event called San Pedro, which is ongoing, and I definitely recommend checking it out. They've had like hybrid versions of it the last couple of years, but it's a really great event. I hope to one day participate in that if I can think of some good sound related ideas. I did this other show where I curated the show or organized it, and I was also an artist in it. I'd love to, I've done a lot of curatorial projects that unfortunately I'm just not going to include in this presentation, but this was a collaboration I did with like a ceramic artist who actually did a lot of like melted glass pieces. And this is kind of like a worm compost tea. So it's kind of like using worm poop to create like a fertilizer out of it. So it almost became this like cauldron of sorts that we were kind of making this worm tea in. And there was a video component projected through and on top of that. And the video was basically like looking at the dirt in the garden and looking at all the bugs crawling around in there, and like just this ridiculous up close video of a bunch of dirt. And the show was called Dirt Making. And there were all these plants in, like myself and a couple of other artists in the show brought in like every plant that we had from home, and they're all in here and they're all like being projected on, and their shadows were kind of being cast all over the wall. And it was kind of like, you felt like you were in some weird forest or field. And then to top it off, I also put all these like little plant pieces into all of the existing holes in the walls. So I filled up all the holes in the walls with like plant material too. So it looked and felt like you were in some strange field or something. And I also started making gardens. So this was a garden I made in like the sculpture department here at CSUOB with some sculpture faculty. So these are like little crucibles for pouring bronze. So, you know, we cleaned those out and we put some succulents and cactuses in those. So they had like a little garden by their like little picnic table area. I did another collaboration with another sculptor who he made this really cool mirror room. Like it's kind of like an infinity chamber basically. And that was an amazing show in its own right. But then he allowed me to bring in a ton of plants. So I brought like all of my house plants from home and just completely filled this infinity cube. And it was basically like you're in a little jungle. And it's kind of all about an experiment of like, if you packed as many plants as you could into a room, could you breathe fresher air in that room? Like, what does it feel like to be in that room? So thinking of this notion of like, you know, the perception of like, will plants actually clean the air? Or is it a perception of that the air is cleaner and just being around the plants makes you feel good? So I was kind of interested in the psychological aspect and then, you know, reality and like, are they related? Are they intertwined? So thinking about plants and like thinking about the air that plants make. I know her. Do you think I could take a 2-minute break?
Oh,
restroom break?
totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
I apologize.
That's okay.
I will be right back.
Maybe in the meantime, we can talk about
Yeah.
what to expect for next week and whatnot.
I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah. Hold on. How do I? Okay, good. So how's everybody doing? Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Awesome. So yeah, while he's on a break, I guess, let's see. Well, you guys can take a break too. How about that? Maybe you all can have a little refreshing time. So what if we come back right at 3:30? 32. That's the 5-minute. Okay, so let's come back at 3:32. Thank you. I'm gonna pause this.
And we're back.
We're back.
Yay. So apologies for that, but I appreciate it. Anyway, let's go and make this slideshow format yet again. And you know, what a great image to stop on. The one and only Kiyomi.
Thank you.
Oops. And yeah, you know, I was doing a lot of plant and garden related projects at that point in time. This was like maybe around, I want to say 2016, 2017, something like that. And this was like this little window garden I made for this art space here in Long Beach that was called Grab Bag Studio, which now they're like, they don't have a specific space, but they still do projects from time to time. And this was like the opening of their gallery and studio at the time. And basically, like I did this little garden project that was kind of like all these ceramic vessels that artist friends I know made, and then they loaned them for this exhibition. So I grew plants in them. So things like house plants and microgreens and vegetables. So just this big assortment of plants and gardening. And you know, many of these plants, I started them on my porch at our house, and then I took them over to the gallery and had like a garden there. And the gallery itself had a whole ton of plants in it as well, like house plants, and you could sit with them. So I was trying to make this like little dense jungle within their gallery, and it was like a really nice place to sit and be. And also, if you were just walking by on 10th Street, you'd see all these crazy plants growing in this little window garden here as well. And then, yeah, after the show, like, you know, returned some of the ceramic vessels and kept growing a lot of the other ones. And some of these plants are still alive today. A lot of them died as well. So, you know, it doesn't look like I've been doing a lot of printmaking, but, you know, guess what? Here's a little bit of a print where I made, and I don't even know if you'd call this a print either, but I was growing all these, this is basically a weed in the garden, and it makes this little blue flower. The plant's called Camelina communis, and it is it's called the Asiatic dayflower. That's its common name, or in Japanese, it's tsiutsa. And basically, like, it makes this blue pigment, or basically this is just the flower pressed onto paper. So like every day I would go out and I would like pick the flowers, and then I would print them or press them onto the paper. So, you know, maybe I could do like 10 flowers a day. And so basically I made this like print or painting or whatever you'd call it, like 3 foot by 4 foot for the show. And it's actually light sensitive. So I made this like cover for it. You know, if you cover it, the pigment will stay, but if it's uncovered, it loses its pigmentation. And actually where it's being held now, I know they're not covering it, so I know it's like super washed out. I haven't seen it in a couple of years, but I'm certain that it's very washed out. But I think I'm actually going to make this work again, like do the exact same thing, just so I can have like the time difference between the works. And I think I would love to keep making this work like each year, you know what I mean? So I definitely plan to revisit this piece. And in a way, like its title is Heaven, and it's kind of like a little bit of a prayer for me. Or it's the notion of like making art can kind of be a prayer of sorts. Because the aspect of making it, I was thinking a lot about these prints that were made like in Buddhist temples, like in like Japan and I think China as well, where like you would bring your scroll to the temple and they would stamp it or whatever, and then you'd put those scrolls into this like sculpture of sorts. And it's like, wow, like there's something really interesting and meditative to like making these stamps or impressions, and then like sort of putting them in this thing that you can't even see. So I felt like there was something interesting there, or just this notion of like making prints or like picking something from the garden and sticking it on the paper, like that seemed meaningful. Other plant related stuff, I made a lot of tea from plants in the garden, and I would serve this at work every day, like a different tea of the day, I guess you could say. Well, technically it's like a water infusion or whatever. Basically, I would just put like the herbs in the water. I call it herb water, and then you could drink it. So this was a show that I curated. Like I basically like this was the water you could drink at the show. Like basically you could drink the water that I made with the herbs. And what's up?
Coffee.
Oh, I was also roasting coffee and then serving coffee like that I roasted and brewed right then and there. So it was kind of like these interesting drinks that I really like to make, and you know, serving it up in an artistic context. And then aquaponics, I mentioned that previously, like that one aquarium with the recirculating system, and I had an opportunity to do an even bigger project, and this is in Santa Ana at Grand Central Art Center, which is like an art space affiliated with Cal State Fullerton. And they, you know, were allowed me to do this aquaponic garden there, which this project lasted over it lasted 1 year, I guess more if you count like the planning and production. But basically every month there was like a different iteration of this exhibition. And this is me getting ready for the first iteration, or this is after the first iteration actually. And you know, one of the iterations was inviting community members during this art walk to kind of like paint these designs onto these like wood panels, which then I fixed onto the system. So basically I had the community kind of decorate and embellish this aquaponic system. And we grew plants in there. So this is like kind of at the start, like maybe 1 month in, just putting in the plants, and they grew over time. I like the baby here. And that, honestly, having kids check out this work was like the coolest thing, like having families come in, and like, you know, these pink lights were also really crazy. Like they're super bright pink lights. And like at nighttime when you walk by, it looked like a UFO landed in downtown Santa Ana. So like just totally crazy. And all these different herbs and vegetables growing in here. So all edible in some way or another, which like one of the iterations of the show, we made salad from everything in here, and we would serve these shots of salad in like the little Tostitos bowls. So we'd make like a little, and people could have a bite-sized piece of salad from this system. I also made, you know, some of that herb water one month. I invited, you know, ceramic artists in, and Kiyomi did a project for one of them as well. So basically this project was activated in different ways every single month until the show ended. And the last iteration was like a musical, an audiovisual performance, like myself and some other musicians, like basically improvised like a 3-hour music set with these also like projected light components in it too. So basically the work just became more and more complex as it progressed. And like another one was like adding all of these ceramic artworks from different artists I know into the like fish tank. So the fish were like swimming around with all these artworks. So these are pieces by Chris Miller. He's like a ceramic artist and 3D artist. But yeah, there's just like a bunch of, and like this hand, for instance, that was by Ihab Ali. He's like another ceramicist. So yeah, just like trying to collaborate with other artists and thinking about like my projects as like a platform for collaboration or like thinking about that synergy between artists and creative people. So that's, I think, a running theme, and my work for the last like 5 years or so. It's like thinking about collaborations and thinking about art as a vehicle for like relationships with others, because from one standpoint, art is absolutely nothing without people to activate it in some way, which I realize that's also a direct contradiction to what I was saying earlier about like secret art, or like art that could be made without a specific exhibition context. So I'm definitely interested in like art as a malleable perspective, right? Like the different ways that it could be. There's an up close. There's some green onions, there's some cabbage, there's some lemongrass. Oh, it's making me so hungry. And this is another project I did. Kiyomi and I did a artist residency at this urban farm called Casimir Farms. And you might say that this is a print of sorts, because I did a press mold on like a 5-gallon bucket for these ceramic pieces. And basically like my project was I was reusing a bunch of ceramic clay from like the ceramics facilities here at CSUOB where I work. And I would collect up all like the the clay that was just like gunk, leftover stuff. And then I went to this garden and I pulled all their like grass and weeds, and I would mesh the two together into a cob and then press that against like a bucket to make like a sort of container from that. So that technically that is printmaking. And then we sort of like pit fired them or fired them in like this bonfire kind of thing. So like basically put all this wood over top and had a fire, cooked a bunch of food, a lot of potatoes, some salmon here. I didn't get to eat this salmon, but it looks good. And we did this a couple of times, and I made a bunch of vessels out of it. These ones aren't press molds, so these ones are not prints, unfortunately. I cannot even remotely claim that it is printmaking, so it's a little sad. These are sculptures. But yeah, like the three in the back, those are press molds off of 5-gallon buckets.
Plants.
Yeah, and so it is printmaking. So there's this plant propagation angle going on where these are green onions from like the grocery store that I replanted in these containers. And I also sprouted these green onions as well. So it's the exact same kind of green onion, but seeds from a previous generation that I saved. And yeah, I just, propagated a whole bunch of green onions, and obviously we ate all these green onions too. So the artwork became a part of us. And then here's another project where this was at Irvine Fine Arts Center. And I presented sort of like a pile of compost. And so this is some compost on a little pedestal that I made. And basically like the show ran for like 2 months, right? And basically I just put this compost on this pedestal and just watched it decompose. So it started like this, and then it became something more like this. So it kind of broke down, and there were even like seeds that like germinated out of it. These are mustard greens. And yeah, I eventually like used all this compost, like just incorporated it into the plants that were at Irvine Fine Arts Center. So like my friend who's a ceramicist there, he had all these tomato plants, and we put them into the tomato plants. And there was a bunch of other planters in this courtyard I put it into. So after it decomposed some more, we just added it to the plants, and it helped, fuel the garden, I guess you could say. And yeah, the funny thing about the reception of this one is like I had this compost here in a pile, and like during the reception, I look outside, I see some kids playing, and I go out there, and then I'm like looking at my pile of compost on the ground, and then all of a sudden I hear like a kid shouting, and he runs up behind me and he jumps right into the middle of the pile of compost, and compost goes everywhere. And at first I was like, oh no, like, but then like, you know, I thought about it for like a second, and I was like, you know what? Kids should be rolling around in the mud. And if my artwork is like a platform for them to, you know, roll around in and get dirty and all this kind of stuff, then it's like, cool, you know, like I'm down to collaborate with the kids like that. Or like my art shouldn't be so highbrow to where kids can't play around and, you know, get dirty and destroy it. So I actually really like that. That kid totally got yelled at by his parents, and he was crying like big time, but I thought it was fine. Shocking though, to have somebody like jump right into your artwork like that right in front of you, but kind of cool. And another project for that same show, there was this tree growing in the gallery, like out of the floor, and nobody there knew where it came from or how long it had been
This is
there.
Danielle calling from Adaptive Realty. I just wanted to check in with you and ask about your potential interest in something that we call a responsible tenant position. It's not really much work at all, really, honestly. It's not much work. It's just basically putting the name of someone on file who would be willing to let us know if there's some sort of
You too.
Cool.
Thank you. All right, here you go.
And so yeah, this tree basically, I started taking care of it, and yeah, I like set up this grow light for it, and you know, I trimmed it down. I would fertilize it. I would clean all the bugs off of it. So for the duration of the show, I really babied this plant and took care of it. And the pink light really brought attention to it. And I made like a little informational text didactic to go next to it to explain the tree and like what species it was, what kind of life it liked, and yeah, just kind of like bringing attention to this tree that was like really neglected, and like I think people there probably walked by it without thinking about it at all. And I actually propagated it, and this tree, the baby of this tree, is living in our backyard right now. That aquaponics system I also showed, that's also in our backyard right now too. So it's like a lot of this work is still living, it's still going. This was a project I did at the Torrance Art Museum, and it was for this show called Permutations. And I did this herb spiral. And basically I went in my garden and I like, you know, took out a bunch of plants and herbs. And this is like some galangal, like a ginger plant. You know, I see cilantro, I see thyme, I see some rosemary, I see rue, I see lemongrass, there's basil, all kinds of herbs. Oh, some fennel in there as well. This was like a cool installation photo where these are like the paper towels that I put the installation on top of. And I don't know, I just thought this was like really cool, like all the paper towels being arranged like that. I just thought it was kind of nice, the paper towels. And actually the point of this sculpture was to dry out the herbs. So basically I put them all into that gallery like fresh, like just harvested them, like just before the reception. And then they were airing out in the space, drying out. And the smell from this piece was very overwhelming. Like it was a very strong smell, like to the point to where apparently like after I installed it, like the museum board, like decided that they needed to put up a sign that said, like, warned people that they might have an allergic reaction if they came and saw the artwork. I should have included the photo of that sign. But the smell was so intense, like when you go into the space, and yeah, just a very strong fragrance from it. But the whole idea was like the work, you know, the plants are put in the space and they're going to dry out in the space. And I was trying to show the time of them drying. So this is the work after it dried, when I like was about to deinstall it. And basically on the closing day, like anybody who showed up, I was giving them free herbs to take home to cook with. So I'd give everybody a bag of herbs who would talk to me during the reception and the closing reception. And then like whatever was left, I took home myself, which for like, yeah, probably like 6 months or a year, I was just like using these dried herbs. And then eventually I'm like, you know what, I should just use the fresh herbs. And I composted what was left. So none of this went to waste. Every aspect of it was either used in a culinary fashion or it was composted and reincorporated back into the garden. There's some lemons, yum. Those were good, I remember. And then another project I did, this was in, I want to say 2019. And it was called May Your Skies Always Be Blue. And I bought all these blue Post-it notes. And basically like had this event at Flux Art Space. That's kind of the little small gallery that Kiyomi and I have this like small work show at. Which this was actually like, the project started as part of a small works show from like 2019. And then it turned into like this, basically this other project, which like the gallery owner enjoyed what I was doing so much that it turned into like its own show. And I was just inviting, or I had open hours and people could show up and they would draw on Post-it notes, kind of like a doodling sort of operation. And with all these doodles and drawings and whatnot, we would stick them up on the gallery window. And over the course of like, I want to say like 3 weeks, you know, we were gradually starting to fill the window, you know, just this collection of all these drawings. And yeah, definitely not printmaking, but I think there's something printmake-ish about it.
There's multiples.
There's multiplicity. So, you know, this notion of like, here's this format, and then, you know, kind of bringing other people's ideas into that and sort of crowdsourcing this creation and like a true collaboration with the community. So yeah, definitely my idea to put up all the Post-it notes, but it's like my idea filled with this entire community's ideas of drawings and images. And so really like, you know, I was kind of thinking of it as like, you know, blue skies is like a symbol for like sort of wishful thinking and allowing people's imaginations to like really be, you know, placed over top of that or superimposed over it. And just really the connection of sitting around and drawing with other people. So it's like pretty rare that you'd actually do a Post-it note by yourself. There's always somebody around who you're probably chatting with and drawing with. And I feel like that communal aspect of the creation of the work was really important. So this is like some of the final ones, like this little girl got to do the very last Post-it note. And that was a really special moment. So we were all like cheering and jumping for joy when we got the last Post-it note put in place. And, you know, there's like a inside and outside. So I was always encouraging people to do like a double-sided drawing, like do a front and a back side. So there's like a front and a back side to this wall of Post-it notes. So there's somebody getting real abstract. That was Richie.
Ah, I can see that.
And then here it is from the inside. And there's even more, like it would go all the way up the wall to the top of the ceiling. And then there's 740 that you could see from the outside. And then there's 448 on the inside that you could not see, making a total of 1,188 Post-it notes in the production of this piece. So then there's this thing that happened, like this pandemic that might have happened that you guys might remember. And yeah, to be honest, it was like really hard to make art during that time. Like, I think for me, work was like all I was doing, like it was crazy. I did make some artwork, so I shouldn't act like I didn't. I made a ton of furniture, which I'm unfortunately not here to talk about furniture, or we could bring that up. But this was a drawing I made during 2020, and it was supposed to be a drawing about nothing. You know, so I was definitely going through my own rough patch, like a lot of health and medical problems during that time frame. It was also a big time of social unrest and all kinds of problems, protests, things like that. And in some ways, it's like thinking about like you know, all the black rectangles, you know, back, not last summer, but the summer before, like on social media, thinking about like George Floyd and like, how do you make art at a time that there's so much turmoil in? And to me, I was almost like, you know, I can make a bunch of art about nothing. And that seems to be like really important subject matter. So this was like trying to make a drawing about nothing, but you know, I think it is about something though. So kind of like this notion of like subject matter within the artwork, like, could you make an artwork devoid of subject matter? And I seem to find that you can't, because even if you try not to make art about something, there will somehow be some idea embedded in there, whether it's intentional or not. And I mean, to me, I kind of read this as like a bit of a landscape image. It's very hard to see, but that's how I see it. And other people say they see different things in this drawing about nothing. This drawing is titled Dark. So the title perhaps suggests that there is something happening there. And then like another piece, this was like in 2021, you know, just like being inspired by things I see in my life and like, you know, trying to find ways to produce artwork or ideas for artwork. So like this was some scrap wood that was being thrown away at my work. I work at California State University, Long Beach, in the art school here, which if you're interested in transferring to CSULB, then we should talk sometime and I can give you advice on that. Yeah, you know, these used to be like some drawers in some sort of cabinet and they were going to get thrown away. And I was like, no, those look pretty important to me. And I took them and I created a rubbing or a frottage or tracing, rubbing, frottage from it. So kind of like taking these, you know, panels and kind of putting paper on top of them and rubbing graphite onto it. So yeah, this is printmaking. This is some relief printmaking, and kind of creating this abstraction from that, which, you know, once again, yeah, I feel like this could be something. It's like I was specifically not trying to make anything, but I knew there was some inherent subject matter there. It reads to me like a landscape, but I could totally imagine other things coming out of it. And then like, you remember those blue flowers? So, you know, we were living in a new house and had a new garden there, and, you know, collecting things from the garden and collecting things from life that can make pigments, because like, you know, in a way I was kind of trying to make artwork without the intentionality of like drawing an image or like painting an image or like this notion of mark making, and trying to think about like, what kind of art could I make without that specific intentionality of like drawing something or cutting something or collaging something or whatever. So I think these were all kind of like explorations and like, what art could I make that is, you know, in some ways unconscious and in some ways automatic, right? Because it's just being made and I'm not in control of like what the end result is or how it's actually occurring. I mean, of course I'm in control in some ways, but you know. So collecting these flowers and, you know, onion skins, like these are all onion skins saved from cooking and turning them into dye material. I was dyeing a lot of clothes at that time. Am I wearing any? No. My socks, I could show you my socks.
Oh.
Well, I won't. But I have a lot of hand-dyed clothes from that time frame. And then I was, you know, basically putting all these dye materials onto paper, just letting them soak into the paper and sticking these flowers in there. And like this piece in particular turned into this work that you see here, which is like using both those blue flowers and then also other garden and dye materials. Just trying to make abstract work in sort of an automatic kind of process where I wasn't really concerned about what the end result was, but I was just sort of following my own sort of steps for what the piece would be. And yeah, this piece was called Light in the Dark. And yeah, I mean, it's an abstract work, but I was definitely thinking about, you know, my life. And I had just been through some major health challenges. So I felt like I was coming out the other side and like, living my life again for like the first time in a long time. If you've ever been through like a really difficult, stressful period in your life, I feel like this was about that, which obviously is abstract. So I don't think most people would see that, but on a personal level, like I think the art had that meaning. And a lot of what I'm making in this last few slides, it's like, yeah, they're really abstract works, but they mean quite a lot to me. Which, yeah, it's like, you know, I think there's these different contexts and meanings found in artwork, and these were kind of like important personal pieces for me, although I could totally see how it looks like just a bunch of stuff splatted on a piece of paper, and it is. I'm not trying to argue with that at all. So this is another one where it's like a bunch of different, you know, plant materials and dye materials and coffee grounds and stuff just all splotched onto the paper, which is kind of this abstract sort of mess. The title of this piece is Fever Dream, so it's kind of got this feverish component to it, I think. But yeah, truly just an abstract work. You know, to me, it has particular emotional connotations based off of how I made it. But yeah, just an abstract piece. Bless you. This was that drawing that I showed you a few slides back, and this was in this show that we had. This was the show called The End of the World, and it was kind of like, you know, dealing with like, yeah, themes related to the end of the world. And each artist in the show had a totally different interpretation of that through their work. Like Kiyomi was in the show, and she did some really cool relief prints. But yeah, and then this is more of those dye materials, just putting them directly onto canvas and just letting it soak in. So just basically plopping this material on there. And this is like a print, right? So it's like I'm putting it down on there and it's maybe. But that basically became this painting here, like kind of an abstract painting, another abstract painting with these different dye materials and also charcoal that I produced myself by burning wood in plants. And then this is all mugwort. Like basically it's kind of like a weed, or this is native California mugwort. So if you go on hikes and you go by like a river, you would definitely see this. And it's also like a very strong dream inducing herb. Some of the most vivid dreams I've had in my life are like due to this plant. So it's kind of has this very strong, you know, dream inducing or almost psychoactive kind of quality to it. And I put that in all of the open holes in this wall, similarly to like how I had done in the past. And that was kind of like an accompanying aspect to this painting. So thinking about like if this painting could be more than just the painting itself. So that was one way of, you know, addressing that concept. And then this was like a sculpture in that show too, which this sculpture was called Lost in Time. And that's a bunch of beach glass on top of broken marble and old dirty mirrors. So like this was like the start of how it was arranged, where I found this marble slab that fell off the back of a truck in the middle of an intersection and shattered into like, you know, I don't know, a few dozen pieces. And all these cars were having to swerve around it. So I went out to the intersection and cleared all the marble off. And these are old dirty mirrors I found. And the beach glass, we would go to this beach, Cabrillo Beach in San Pedro. And it's kind of by Sunken City, where all the youth like to throw their beer bottles out into the ocean. And you know, there's broken glass everywhere, and it's really sad and tragic. But there's also a ton of beach glass there, which is like a beautiful thing born out of kind of the tragedy of the excessive nature of what people are doing there. But yeah, you know, these are all like materials that to me, like, you know, they had a specific context and purpose and meaning in their previous life, but now they're broken or ruined. But I still find them to be very beautiful, captivating materials. And I felt like they deserved some sort of arrangement, which is ultimately it became kind of like this on the floor. And the whole time the show was up, I would have to sit there and kind of guard it, because people would walk into it and like step on it because it was on the floor, and you would hear like all this glass smashing and shattering. I actually really loved that. And it was fun to like have to remake the piece every time somebody would walk into it. I actually really enjoyed that. You know, I wouldn't invite people to step on it, but if they did, you know, as long as they didn't hurt themselves, then I think it was interesting. And I still have all these materials, so I'm sure I'll remake it in some form or another. And then most recently, so these are some very small works. And this is like relief printing with watercolor. So I made a little stamp out of an eraser, and I was printing these little circles with watercolor onto these small panels. And this work is currently on view at Flux Art Space, opening on Saturday. And this is a depiction of salmon roe. So this piece is titled Kokanee, and that's a kind of salmon that exists in freshwater lakes. So it's salmon that have been cut off from the ocean, and they live in these lakes and they swim upstream and all that, but they're cut off from like the ocean. So they're like freshwater salmon. And where I grew up in Canada, this was like the kind of salmon that were in my region. And there's even a beer called Kokanee beer that was kind of from my region as well. Yeah, it's kind of an homage to that. I've made some other prints using this exact same stamp and other artwork about salmon eggs, which to me, this relates to this very vivid experience I had, like going with my grandma to the salmon runs in the fall and just like seeing all the dead decaying salmon, but then also seeing like millions of these little eggs in the river and like reaching in and playing with these weird squishy eggs and like picking up like the dead dying salmon and just like this very vivid experience of like this generational exchange where this old generation sacrifices themselves for this new generation. And to me, that was just really special and meaningful as like a kid, and it always kind of stuck with me. And I've been interested in like, you know, using circles to kind of represent eggs in that sort of way. So yeah, I definitely want to do some more work with these salmon eggs. So hopefully this will inspire me to keep going with that idea. But yeah, there's ending with a little printmaking for you. This is actually some printmaking, but it might be painting. You might consider it painting. And that concludes the artist talk. So I know it's probably going a little too long time-wise.
Well, we did take
Apologies.
some time in the beginning to talk about your projects and stuff like that. So there's that. But I do want to take a little bit of time now if there is any questions, like a little bit of Q&A maybe from you guys.
Where's the prints?
Where's the prints? If that's your question, that's okay too.
It's a fair question.
Yeah, go ahead, type in the chat. Oh, that's
Oh,
okay.
no worries, it's all good.
That's okay. That's okay. I have definitely had to be in the same situation before as well.
Yeah, so sorry about that.
No worries.
I would say that I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the title, but the window pieces, I think they were etchings, is like very dark, and there was kind of a series. I saw like similarities within that and maybe other prints that you had. Like I would say maybe like mysterious or something like that. There's kind of like a mysterious sort of like aspect like woven through not just the prints, but maybe other works too. Like, do you feel like that is maybe accurate, or do you have any thoughts there? Because I don't want to say darkness, because I feel like that has like a weird connotation, but like, you know, like more mysterious element, something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I like that mysterious. Might have to add that to the artist statement or something. So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely interested in that as like art being, you know, something a little more than what it is, right? Like basically like the prompt for your current project. Like I think, you know, art kind of being a supernatural or spiritual thing is like an important idea in my work. Like I feel like art guides how we experience and feel the world around us. So I am definitely interested in this sort of mystery or this, you know, supernatural or spiritual engagement through art, whether it's through like the making itself or the experience of the artwork, or like the connection to others through the making of the work or the experience. It's like, those are all like really interesting things to me. And the world is like a really magical, mysterious place. And I can't look at the world without being like, without having my mind blown apart, right? So I feel like that kind of goes into the work. Like I definitely see the world as like a very interesting, transformative thing that we're all engaged in. So yeah, I'm glad you see that in the work. I think that is definitely a component that is there. Or, you know, yeah, I think hopefully that's something that is a through line in all the work.
Yeah, I definitely saw that. And maybe like ethereal or something like that is kind of another word I would use to try to like explain what I'm getting.
I'll take it. Yeah. Ethereal sounds even better. Just, the idea of like, I think of myself as a conceptual artist, and my takeaway of that is that like the idea inherent in the work is worth so much more than the work itself, or like the object itself. So, in a way, I feel my art has no value because really the idea has the value in my mind. So, in some approaches or interpretations, that could be an ethereal aspect of the work, because it's like, especially with all the works that were like really just experiments or trials or different tests, it's like I think that was always the goal in it, is to like just different approaches to art making and the different kinds of meaning you could get out of that. But really always thinking about art making as something to expand your current vision of the world or state of being. Like, to me, art should be a way to grow as a person and to expand what you're doing as a person. So it's always had that meaning for me. And that's always my goal, just in making work in general, regardless of the subject matter.
Yeah. I had one other comment and then I'll stop. But
Thank you.
you mentioned something about when does the work like start and begin kind of thing, or like when does art, and I just was thinking about that for a while and was like, well, it could also just always be happening, like life is art to some degree. And I don't know, I feel like I want to think about that more, like when does it end and begin, but then there's also that element of like it's always there.
Oh yeah.
Maybe it's one.
And I would encourage every artist to think real hard about that one.
Yeah.
Or just anybody, it's like, I think it's such an important question, because there's so many things in life that you could consider to be art, or at the very least artistic, right? And people really, I talk to so many people who are like, I'm not an artist. And it's like, yeah, right. You're totally an artist, and you totally make art. And it's like, people want to deny themselves of that. And I feel like empowering oneself in seeing the art around you, or seeing the things you do as art making, I feel like it really opens up a lot of ideas and possibilities. And I should have put in the notion of art versus life, and art and life in this talk, because I think you're right on. That's definitely like a big idea in the work, or it's something I think about a lot. And I certainly encourage others to do it, because we're definitely constrained by our own mental limitations. So if we choose to take off the blinders, there are limitless possibilities in this world, right?
Totally. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
What happened to all the fish that you had for the exhibit?
Oh no. A lot of them are dead now. I hate to say it. And there's actually this print I should have shown you, which had like the names of all the fish who died.
Do you ever print them?
Yeah, I did. It's a relief print, and it's almost like a tombstone of sorts, or a memorial. Which actually, I still have the relief block that I made it from, and it's actually incorporated into another furniture piece I made. But yeah, unfortunately, a lot of them died, or all of them really, from those ones. Some of them are still alive from the Grand Central Aquaponics show. So some of them still are alive. There's some goldfish and minnows that are still kicking.
Are they like do you have them, or did you like give them away to like friends, or like are they your fish? I
gave the Aquaponics System that ran for a year. I gave that to a friend, and he kept it in his backyard for I want to say 3 years, and then now I took it back and it's in my backyard because I moved to a bigger place where I could actually do it. And the remaining fish that are still alive from that ordeal are still going strong. They look happy. But yeah, a lot of fish did die in the making of that project, and I feel pretty guilty about it.
Yeah.
So sorry.
Well, none of them were intentional.
Some of them lived for like years, like 5 years. It was like really heartbreaking when they died, like really sad. I definitely had major emotional investments to it. And I mean, that's kind of like one reason why I stopped doing that project, is because it's like, I don't feel right buying fish knowing they could potentially die. In some ways, it feels wrong to buy fish from a pet store because of that project, because like learning about the industry, learning about how fish are bred and produced and sold, and how like most of the fish in the pet store are diseased already. So you take them home and then they die like a couple days later, you know, that's like a big part of it. And it just feels wrong to buy fish that, you know, already have a huge mortality risk when you just bring them home and try to incorporate them into your aquarium.
Yeah.
So that's one of my biggest criticisms of like the whole fish market, is like, it's not set up with the fish's well-being in mind at all, right? It's just based around like people going into the pet store and being like, I like the way that fish looks, I'll take 10. And then, you know, they take them home and 5 die. And you know, so it's like, it's very sad to me. And there's this very sad aspect of like the fish market, which, you know,
or a pet industry in
or pet
general.
industry, yeah. So it's like, I think pets are sort of problematic in that way. And but yeah, I love the fish that we do have. They're so much fun to watch. It's so relaxing. I really like snails, aquatics.
Yeah, we have, I'm asking because that's my aquarium in the back
Oh,
there.
Very cool.
Yeah, my partner is really into aquascaping.
Great.
Yeah, we used to have a bunch of that, the one plant you were talking about, is it mugwort?
That's hornwort.
Hornwort. Yeah, we used to have a ton of hornwort, but then it got eaten by algae.
Yeah, it can sometimes be, and fish like to eat it too.
I'm gonna turn on the light to the.
Yeah, please. I'd love to see it. Aquascaping is one of my favorite genres of fish keeping. So I've done a little bit, but probably not on the level that yours is. Yeah, that looks really cool. Do you have shrimp in there by any chance?
No, we have snails, and then we had a Propossmus. He just died.
Yeah.
And then, oh my God, oh, there's a snail infestation.
Cool.
You can see them. Do you see all the little? Do you see those little? There's like little tiny dots everywhere.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, those are snails.
That's awesome. I love snails. I think they're so cool, like aquatic snails.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So yeah, I mean, if you want to try another fish in there, I would encourage a beta, because
Yeah, we used to. The whole thing was like constructed around our pet fish named Bish. He was a really pretty beta fish. And we had him for about 1.5 years, and then he died. And then it just hasn't really been the same.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
betas don't live that long. They only live like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So
And they're
like,
fussy.
yeah.
They get sick easy.
Yeah. Get a female beta if you get a beta. That's my
I know.
favorite.
Well, that was interesting. You were saying that they like to be in groups. So I might get a group of them.
They don't like to be in groups. You have to keep like a group of like 6 or more fish. Otherwise, if you have too few, then there's like a pecking order that forms.
Right.
And, like the weakest fish will really get picked on, and basically.
You mean a group of 6 betas or a group of 6 fish in general?
Like 6 betas.
6 betas. Okay. I don't know if I don't think our tank's big enough for 6 betas.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it in that tank, but you could get 1 female beta. And I find that the personalities of the female betas is much more interesting than that of the male betas. That's the reason I say it. And then also like male betas are also very bred out to have those very beautiful colors and fin shapes and things like that. And I have this suspicion that female betas are not bred out in the same sort of way. So genetically, I feel like they're like a stronger fish because they haven't had that sort of genetic modification of inbreeding. Because basically all the beautiful fish you see have been very inbred to have the features that they have. But that makes them a much weaker fish kind of on a genetic level. So like your common goldfish, your like 5-cent goldfish that you get at the fair,
The feeders.
that one is has a lot more vitality to it than like the fancy goldfish with the flowing fins and all that kind of stuff. So there's this notion of like this plainer fish has, it's not as bred out, and it hasn't been inbred to achieve those certain features. So that's like another aspect of like the fish market that is like horribly detrimental to the animals that are being sold in it. So I always support buying like your cheapo feeder fish, like because they're actually like much stronger and more resilient than the fancy, more beautiful fish that we are sometimes encouraged to buy. So the female betas are really boring looking, but I think they're, you know, more intelligent, and I think they're more resilient.
I think there was a tragedy in that female beta
It
sorority.
was, and the real downfall came from buying more betas, because I think one of them had an infection and it spread on to the other fish, and all these other fish got this infection, and it killed them all off one by one. And that was really tragic for me. I was like so bummed out when that happened. And yeah, that was kind of like the beginning of the end for like the scale of fish keeping that I was doing, because I'm like, you know what, this is so sad. Like I can't keep buying the fish for this reason. Granted, it was a very special time keeping them for like the months and years that I did. But when they all eventually died out, which I mean, some of them lived for like 5 years or more, which I mean, those fish probably could have lived up to 20 years maybe. In ideal circumstances. But yeah, I definitely like didn't buy more fish aside from like what I needed to run my aquaponics at that point, because I think just doing the project, it was just like, you know, fish keeping is not a very humane thing to do unless like you're doing it in certain ways. But part of like the project and the ideas was this, like, everybody has a different take on like what's moral in terms of like keeping pets or animals or whatever. And I was kind of interested in, like, for me, what's like my fine line? Like, what can I do? How can I keep like animals or fish and it be a positive experience for both parties, instead of me like keeping captive animals and torturing them? And I think different people would have a different opinion about that. Like, I'm still interested in like hobbyists and stuff like that, and their approach to fish keeping, but some of it I do find is like a little morally wrong and not something that I would personally do.
Oh yeah, Gyotaku, Simone. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, when I was asking if you print the fish, like when they die, I mean like literally printing them.
Oh, print the fish. That would
Yeah.
be.
Me, but I know this other artist who was doing Gyotaku prints, and
Yeah.
that was really cool. He would actually fish them, spear fishing, and then he would print them. I've never done that.
I'll check that out. Look at
Oh,
this.
sweet. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. I love
Oh, I like-
aquascaping. Like, it's really beautiful, special stuff.
Terrariums, yes.
For me, I'm not that into aquascaping on that level, just because there's, you know, it's like a very artificial thing to create like such a natural environment. But I actually do like aquascaping, like simpler versions of aquascaping without like maybe with fewer plants and without like the lights and stuff like that. There's this notion of natural aquascaping, and I have this book about it that's like really interesting, that breaks into like the science of like how you can keep a fish tank with like, you know, plants growing in like the soil, like how to imitate a natural environment. So there's a lot of like interesting ideas there, and a lot of different approaches to fish keeping that I really like and am inspired by.
What's going on here? Do you do Gyotaku, Simone? Maybe I'm sending you. Oh, you make Gyotaku. That's awesome.
Yeah, one of my sucker fish just died last week,
Oh no.
Oh,
but I printed him. So now he's
oh,
immortalized.
oh my God.
Wow.
That's so special. It is so special. His grave tombstone print that he was doing, I thought it was kind of funny because there were a lot of rooms left. So it's kind of like anticipating more to die. That's what I was thinking when I saw that. Yeah. But it's similar kind of thoughts though, right? It's when you're trying to memorialize all these friends of yours. I think Sinclair keeps rats, actually, rats or mice.
Yeah, I have 2 pet mice.
Cool.
So this class is kind of like full of interesting connection to animals, actually.
Sinclair, you could print their little footsteps.
Oh
I
yes,
could.
You sure could.
That'd be
I'd have to get definitely like a safe dye or ink for
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
Those are some
It's
cool
true.
prints though.
That's true.
Sad,
Yeah,
but very beautiful.
yeah.
I love plecostomuses. Those fish can grow to be enormous too.
Really.
I would love to have a giant plecostomus.
Hmm.
Any final questions? I actually need to get
Oh, sure,
going here
sure,
in a
sure.
minute. I need to see our gallery shows
Okay,
before they
go ahead.
close. Take some photos for the Instagram, the
Sure.
school Instagram page.
Yeah, any questions that you have
Last questions.
for Michael?
Thoughts, comments, criticisms, whatever.
Yeah, I have final comment then. When Danielle was asking you questions, I really thought about the idea of portal, maybe. I feel like you're sort of creating ways to shift perceptions, like on ordinary moments to extraordinary moments. And yeah, like just kind of like looking at what surrounds you in slightly different way.
Yeah, and one like word that relates to that is like this notion of salience, where it's like, you know, something catching your eye or bringing attention to you, and that causing you to have like a paradigm shift in how you see things. So I definitely like this idea of salience is really important to me, and art being like a means of, you know, extrapolating new meanings from the existing world around us. Last question, what is your favorite type of printmaking and why? Great question. Well, you know what, my evasive answer to this is like, well, I like them all, because whatever kind of image you have in your head, there's a printmaking process you can use to best articulate that image. So I think the diversity of approaches to image making makes me love all these different types of prints. I do them all. I love doing all these print processes. But if I had to pick a favorite, well, that's a tough one, because lithography is the most addictive to me by far. Like when I start doing a lithograph, I can't stop, and it's all I can think about. Etching, I like etching a lot, but it takes a lot of time. Mesotint, like you saw a lot of the Mesotint works. That's my favorite etching process. That might be my favorite just process in general. But I also, you know, it's like, oh, I also like monotyping, and screen printing is so practical, and who could forget the obvious nature of relief printing? So, you know, they're all great. Like, I think it's all good stuff.
Yeah.
I wish I had more time to do even more prints.
Here's something from Damien. Amazing stuff. Thanks so much for sharing such wide range. Really appreciate this. And favorite ink.
Ooh. You know, right now my favorite ink is just plant material. So just kind of creating natural dyes through just things I pick out of the garden, or like leftover food, or like leftover coffee grounds, or like leftover tea. So yeah, lately I've been into this idea of like, you know, pigmentation or image making through unconventional materials, where it's like, yeah, chewing tobacco is perfect.
That'll have
That could
interesting
be
effect.
a beautiful watercolor painting.
It's water, right? Spit.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I love that idea of like natural colors almost. And the main reason for that is just like trying to avoid the notion of like, I'm an artist and I'll use paint from the tube or whatever, you know, like trying to find like a more unconscious means of making an image or a color or a mark or whatever.
Subversive.
Yeah, trying to be different with it, I guess. And I'm also really into just natural, like, you know, plants, gardening, all this stuff. So it like fits in that sort of way too. But I like this idea of like, right now I'm into this idea of like trying to make a picture without the intention of doing it, and kind of like, you know, approaching abstraction in that sort of way. So trying to avoid using art materials in the making of art, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But then again, favorite ink, I don't know, etching ink. I don't have a specific favorite. So yeah.
You use mine?
I use
stash.
whatever I can. I like the Charbonnel, like watercolor, aquawash stuff. It's, you know, whatever I can use. I try to just work with whatever materials are available to me, and I try not to be too choosy.
I'm the choosy one.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I hate to run, but I've got.
All right, go.
Visit these galleries. And
Thank
anyway,
you.
thanks so much. It's been fun.
you.
I had a great time. And yeah, enjoy the rest of class.
Yeah, and if you come to Flux on December, oh my gosh, look at that! You see that? Oh my gosh!
We were just talking about pet rats earlier today.
Yeah, it's true. It's a recurring theme.
They are
around here.
wonderful
Cutie,
creatures. All right, have a blessed
All right,
Thursday.
get out of here. Bye-bye. Thank you. All right. Anyways, thank you so much. And so I'm gonna stop recording, actually. I'm still recording.